The situation in Dalton and Thornton Township has become an emblem of dysfunction, with local leadership engaged in a seemingly endless cycle of infighting and personal vendettas, leaving residents frustrated and vulnerable. The latest township meeting, intended to address critical issues, such as a lack of insurance coverage for employees, spiraled into chaos, showcasing a level of dysfunction that shocked even those familiar with the area's political landscape. Tiffany Henyard, the township supervisor, took the meeting to unprecedented levels of dysfunction. Instead of focusing on the township's critical issues, Henyard turned the session into an airing of personal grievances, undermining the possibility of any meaningful resolution. The moment she called the meeting to order, it was clear this would not be a professional discussion about the township's needs. Instead, the meeting quickly devolved into a spectacle, a chaotic mix of accusations, insults, and political drama. The central issue, the township's lack of insurance coverage for its employees, was left unresolved as both sides, led by Henyard and the township trustees, engaged in a public blame game. Henyard accused the trustees of neglecting their duties and skipping meetings, even raising her voice to yell, "You didn't attend a board meeting and now we don't have insurance." The township had been without insurance for weeks, leaving employees vulnerable and unprotected. Yet the meeting focused more on finger-pointing than on finding solutions. As the session continued, tensions escalated. Personal attacks took center stage, and rather than addressing the urgent issue of insurance coverage, the meeting became a platform for Henyard and her critics to engage in a war of words. Henyard's combative leadership style, which lacked accountability and direction, only deepened the divide between the township's leaders. It became evident that this dysfunction was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger, ongoing pattern. Once seen as a promising leader, Henyard's actions during the meeting only underscored how her leadership had devolved into a political circus. Her primary focus seemed to be eliminating political rivals rather than addressing the needs of the community. Chris Gonzalez, one of Henyard's most vocal opponents, was particularly critical. Gonzalez had once supported Henyard for supervisor, but their relationship soured after a bitter fallout during a contentious Democratic primary. His criticisms were sharp, accusing Henyard of using the insurance issue for political gain instead of genuinely addressing the township's problems. As the meeting dragged on, Henyard's disdain for Gonzalez became increasingly clear, her insults growing louder and more personal. The session, originally meant to resolve vital issues, quickly morphed into a platform for Henyard to settle old scores. Rather than working towards a solution, she seemed more interested in advancing her political agenda, which further alienated many in the room and left the residents questioning whether Henyard was truly fit to govern. The lack of professionalism in the meeting was glaringly obvious. Both Henyard and the trustees publicly vented their frustrations, turning the session into a trivial power struggle. The focus on egos and petty squabbles overshadowed any effort to address the township's critical issues, such as the lack of insurance coverage for employees. The meeting, which should have been a time for collaboration and problem-solving, instead deepened the rift between Henyard and the trustees, leaving the residents demoralized and disappointed. The media, which had been hoped to shed light on the township struggles and drive meaningful change, quickly turned into a spectacle of political infighting. Some residents likened the meeting to a soap opera, while others humorously compared it to a wrestling match, capturing the childish behavior and political posturing on display. The inability to set aside personal conflicts for the sake of the community's welfare only highlighted the dysfunction at the heart of the township's governance. The meeting's failure to resolve any critical issues, most notably the lack of insurance, has only increased the vulnerability of the township's operations. As each day passes without a solution, township properties, vehicles, and vital programs remain unprotected, and employees continue to face job insecurity. The risks are mounting, and the lack of action from the township's leadership only adds to the uncertainty. The ongoing infighting has fostered a political climate where personal agendas take precedence over the needs of the people they were elected to serve. The township's inability to tackle pressing issues like insurance coverage and budget approval has further exacerbated the divide within its leadership. Residents are left wondering when, if ever, their leaders will focus on the real work that needs to be done rather than on their political egos. The failure of this meeting to bring about any meaningful change highlights the growing dysfunction under Henyard's leadership. The township is facing a leadership crisis, and residents are questioning how much longer they will be forced to endure a political circus that prioritizes personal grudges over the welfare of the community. The entrenched positions of both Henyard and the trustees make it seem unlikely that any significant progress will be made unless there is a dramatic shift in leadership. The meeting was broadcast live, giving a wider audience the chance to witness the spectacle. The comment section quickly became a battleground, with supporters of Henyard praising her for standing firm against her critics, while her detractors blamed her for instigating the chaos in the first place. This division only further emphasized the deepening divide within the township's leadership, making the prospects for meaningful change seem grim. Without cooperation or accountability, the township's future looks increasingly uncertain as the holiday season approaches. Employees are left wondering about their job security, and residents who rely on essential services, such as food assistance and medical appointment transportation, are left in limbo, unsure whether these services will continue to be available when they need them most. The failure of the meeting to address any of these concerns has only intensified the sense of uncertainty among both residents and staff. The township's lack of progress is evident to everyone watching, with one commentator lamenting that while Henyard seems to be the only one trying to clean up the mess, she faces fierce opposition from all sides. This constant political drama leaves no room for action, and the township continues to fail in addressing its most pressing concerns with no clear direction in sight. It is becoming increasingly difficult to see a path forward for Dalton and Thornton Township. The lack of cooperation, accountability, and leadership continues to foster an environment of dysfunction, with personal agendas overshadowing the needs of the people. Residents are left questioning whether they will ever see the kind of leadership that will prioritize their well-being over petty political disputes. Until significant changes in leadership and approach occur, the township's future remains uncertain, and its residents will continue to suffer from the ongoing dysfunction that has come to define its governance. The ongoing political crisis in Dalton and Thornton Township shows no signs of resolution, leaving residents questioning how much longer they will have to endure a cycle of infighting, neglect, and dysfunction before someone steps in to restore order. As basic services and protections continue to go unaddressed, the situation grows ever more dire. The township's lack of leadership has created an environment where personal egos and grievances consistently outweigh the needs of the community, and prolonged instability has raised serious concerns about the township's future. The latest meeting of the township, intended to address critical issues like the lack of insurance coverage for employees, ended without a solution. This failure only deepened the residents' sense of disillusionment. Dalton and Thornton Township are already grappling with a political climate where egos, power struggles, and personal disputes continue to dominate over the greater good. As the township's leadership becomes more entrenched in these conflicts, trust between leaders and the community continues to erode as residents prepare for a primary election in February. Many are questioning if the dysfunction will ever end, frustrated by the endless political circus. Voters are beginning to wonder how long they will be forced to endure the chaotic cycle of infighting and neglect before leaders finally shift their focus to addressing the real issues facing the community. The township's future remains uncertain, and the growing frustration among residents is palpable. One attendee at a recent meeting summed up the widespread sentiment: "It's just another day in Thornton Township." Meanwhile, Tiffany Henyard, the township supervisor, seemed disconnected from the gravity of the situation. Her decision to host a bingo night amid an escalating crisis only heightened the sense of detachment between leadership and the residents. Critics were quick to point out that such an event seemed wildly inappropriate given the urgent issues facing the township. How could Henyard prioritize a bingo night when the township was unraveling before her eyes? Henyard supporters, however, defended her choice, arguing that she was simply trying to maintain a sense of community during difficult times. But for many residents, the optics of such an event were troubling, with essential services like meal programs and transportation for seniors hanging in the balance, and township employees facing the threat of layoffs. The community needed leadership that was focused on real solutions, not distractions. The decision to prioritize bingo over urgent matters left many residents feeling as though Henyard was more concerned with maintaining a veneer of normalcy than addressing the township's dire problems. The township's problems only deepened as the lack of insurance coverage continued to expose vulnerable residents to greater risks. Seniors who depended on vital services like transportation and meals were at risk of losing these critical programs due to the township's inability to secure proper insurance. Without this essential safety net, many of the township's most vulnerable residents were left without the support they relied on. Henyard's insistence on preventing employee layoffs, while a laudable effort to protect jobs, also came under scrutiny. Critics argued that her focus on preserving political alliances and avoiding layoffs seemed more about securing her own position of power than about addressing the township's immediate needs. The longer Henyard's political maneuvering took precedence over the township's real problems, the more the community's frustrations grew as the dysfunction deepened. Many residents became increasingly exasperated, and their patience began to wear thin. The township's reputation continued to suffer, with each failed meeting and unresolved issue further eroding trust in its leadership. What was once seen as political theater now appeared as a destructive distraction, and residents were left feeling disillusioned by a leadership more concerned with personal disputes than with governing effectively. The prolonged controversy had reached a point where the public no longer saw the issues as stemming from genuine concerns about governance, but as a direct result of personal grudges and political gamesmanship. As Henyard's leadership faltered, the township's residents, who had once hoped for positive change, began to wonder if there was any hope left for the community. With each passing day, the dysfunction deepened, and the future of the township seemed to slip further out of reach. At the heart of this turmoil stood Tiffany Henyard, whose leadership style had become a significant source of the township's problems. Her determination to protect her authority and defend her position had led to a fiercely combative approach to governance. Henyard was unwilling to listen to opposing viewpoints, and her refusal to compromise made collaboration within the township nearly impossible. This became particularly evident when a trustee proposed a financial compromise to address some of the township's most pressing issues, only for Henyard to outright reject the proposal without any meaningful discussion. Her refusal to engage with others or seek common ground further solidified the perception that her leadership style was contributing to the dysfunction rather than resolving it. As the political rift deepened, the township's ability to find solutions grew more and more unlikely. Potential allies, willing to help restore order, were increasingly alienated by Henyard's refusal to cooperate. The residents, caught in the middle of the ongoing political battle, were left watching helplessly as the township's future grew more uncertain by the day. Henyard hardline tactics, combined with her determination to consolidate power, have only driven away those who might have helped bring stability to the township. Her decision-making, which prioritized her own authority over the needs of the community, continued to exacerbate the crisis. With each failed attempt at resolution, the community situation worsened, and residents began to lose hope that any meaningful change would come under Henyard's leadership. One of Henyard's most vocal critics, State Senator Napoleon Harris, has accused her of orchestrating political moves aimed at weakening his influence in the township. Harris, who has a long-standing feud with Henyard, claimed that her actions to exclude him from the Democratic ballot for supervisor were politically motivated, designed to undermine his authority. This bitter rivalry only added fuel to the already toxic political climate, making it even harder for local leaders to come together and work for the community's benefit. The already fractured leadership in the township became even more divided, with Henyard's hardline stance only increasing the animosity between her and her detractors. The ongoing dysfunction in the township is not just a matter of political squabbles. It has real consequences for the community. Basic services continue to go unaddressed, and a lack of leadership leaves the township vulnerable to further decline. Seniors and vulnerable residents who rely on essential services like meal programs, medical transportation, and assistance programs are facing a future full of uncertainty. The township's failure to address these needs and secure the proper insurance coverage of these services puts the community at great risk. And as the dysfunction continues to worsen, it becomes increasingly clear that Henyard's leadership is no longer a viable path forward for the township. The crisis, which had been festering for months, reached a point where the residents could no longer ignore its growing impact. With each failed meeting and unresolved issue, the community's frustration and urgency grew. It became evident that the township's future was in jeopardy, and that leadership, as it currently stood under Henyard, was only worsening the situation. The longer the cycle of infighting and neglect continues, the more difficult it becomes to envision a path forward for Dalton and Thornton Township. As Henyard's leadership has continued to spiral, so too has the hope for progress in the township. Residents, once hopeful for change, now find themselves questioning whether their leaders will ever set aside personal disputes and begin working together for the community's benefit. Until such a shift happens, the township will continue to spiral deeper into dysfunction, and the dreams of a stable, prosperous future will remain out of reach. The crisis in Dalton and Thornton Township is a stark reminder of the consequences of leadership failure, and the urgent need for change before the community's foundation is irreparably damaged. The political crisis in Thornton Township has deepened, with Tiffany Henyard's leadership now at the center of an escalating storm. Her filing of multiple lawsuits against State Senator Napoleon Harris and the Democratic Party has further intensified the already volatile political environment. Henyard claims these legal battles are a fight for justice, but many critics argue that they serve as a distraction from the township's pressing issues. Political scheming and internal conflicts have eclipsed the critical work that needs to be done, with the township's residents left to deal with the fallout since Henyard was elected mayor of Dalton in 2021. Her administration has been marked by financial mismanagement allegations and a federal investigation into how her office handled township finances. These scandals have severely damaged her reputation, and despite mounting criticism, Henyard has shown little sign of backing down. The township's dysfunction, fueled by these controversies, has created a deepened divide among local leaders, With Henyard's political rivals increasingly working to discredit her, Henyard's lawsuits are just the latest chapter in this long-running saga. While she presents them as a battle for fairness and justice, her opponents view them as an extension of the toxic politics that have defined the township for years. As tensions rise, Henyard remains resolute, declaring on social media her intention to run for re-election and continue to fight for Thornton Township's future. However, her political future is uncertain. Henyard was recently removed from the Democratic ballot for supervisor, limiting her options for maintaining political influence. While her position as mayor of Dalton remains secure for now, it is under constant threat as her rivals, including senior trustee Jason House, push relentlessly to oust her. House, who has openly challenged Henyard's leadership, has launched his own mayoral campaign with a focus on ethics reform and restoring community trust. Some view House's bid for mayor as a calculated move to gain power, while others see it as another symptom of the broader dysfunction in Thornton Township. House claims his campaign is about doing what's best for people of Dalton, not about pursuing personal power. However, whatever the motivations behind his campaign, it is clear that the power struggle between Henyard and House is far from over. Both are fiercely entrenched in the political battle, and the township's future hangs in the balance. Henyard supporters, undeterred by the fierce opposition, are working tirelessly to get her back on the ballot for both Thornton Township and Dalton. But these efforts have only fueled further division, with accusations of manipulation and dishonest tactics to maintain her grip on power. Last week, Henyard's opponents accused her of using underhanded methods to remove challengers from the ballot, further escalating the political unrest in the region. This has led to widespread frustration and a growing sense of disillusionment among residents, who are caught in the middle of a political battle that seems to have no end in sight. The township remains deeply divided, with Henyard and her opponents locked in a bitter struggle for control. Meanwhile, critical issues like financial stability, essential services, and effective governance remain unresolved, leaving residents increasingly frustrated and uncertain about their future. The ongoing political infighting has overshadowed the township's true problems, and with no resolution in sight, many are left questioning whether the leadership will ever set aside personal grievances and begin working together to address the pressing issues facing the community. The latest meeting, which was meant to address critical problems like securing insurance coverage for employees and approving the budget, only made matters worse. Conflicting reactions from the public and widespread discontent highlighted the growing dysfunction in the township. Some locals have accused Henyard of attempting to trick the board into paying her personal debts by adding unnecessary insurance premiums. These accusations reflect a mounting disillusionment among voters, who believe their elected officials are more interested in political maneuvering than in acting in the public's best interest. As the infighting continues, the township's financial situation becomes more precarious. The lack of cooperation between Henyard and the trustees has left many essential services in jeopardy. Services like transportation for seniors, meal programs, and medical appointment assistance are all at risk as the township fails to secure adequate insurance coverage. The longer these issues remain unresolved, the more vulnerable the community becomes. Despite the mounting criticism, Henyard remains defiant, claiming that the accusations against her are baseless and that she is still fighting for the people of Thornton Township. However, it is increasingly unclear whether she can fulfill that promise given the current state of dysfunction. The township's building remains locked, with a sign reading "Closed" posted on the door, deepening the sense of uncertainty among residents. The dysfunction in Thornton Township is growing more entrenched with each passing day. For many, the central question is whether Henyard is a great leader capable of overcoming challenges, or she is continuing to contribute to the very problems that have left the township in chaos. The stakes are high, and the future of the township is at risk. With no clear resolution in sight, residents are left wondering if they will ever see the day when their leaders put aside their personal grievances and begin working together to address the pressing issues facing the community. Critical issues like securing insurance coverage, approving the budget, and addressing leadership dysfunction are hanging in the balance, and the community's frustration continues to grow. Henyard's leadership has increasingly come under fire, with critics accusing her of prioritizing her own power over the needs of the people. Her refusal to collaborate with others and her focus on consolidating political influence have deepened the divide in Thornton Township. The power struggle between Henyard and her opponents shows no signs of letting up, and as the township's problems continue to fester, the possibility of meaningful progress becomes more distant. Henyard supporters, however, continue to rally behind her, insisting that her leadership is vital for the future of the township. But with the growing tide of criticism and the ongoing legal battles, it is unclear whether Henyard can regain the trust of the community. As the political infighting intensifies, the residents of Thornton Township are left to navigate a political landscape that is increasingly marked by division, dysfunction, and uncertainty. The township's future seems more uncertain than ever, and as the power struggle between Henyard and House rages on, it remains to be seen whether any meaningful change will come. Will the leadership of Thornton Township rise above the chaos and work together for the good of the community, or will the dysfunction continue to spiral, leaving the residents to bear the consequences? The answers to these questions remain unclear. But what is certain is that the stakes are high and the need for effective leadership has never been more urgent until the leaders of Thornton Township put aside their personal agendas and begin to work for the benefit of the community. Residents will continue to suffer under the weight of a broken system. The future of the township is at risk, and the ongoing infighting is only deepening the uncertainty. For the people of Thornton Township, the question remains: when will the chaos end, and when will their leaders finally prioritize the well-being of the community over their own political ambitions? Only time will tell if the township can recover and move forward, or if it will remain trapped in a cycle of dysfunction and division.